can go ahead and get started. I guess we have several people here, and I'm sure other people um, will be joining us. I think many of you all may know Antonio, who's over in the College of Medicine, who I've worked with for many years with admissions in there. And so I know talking with the dean and several others in the College of Medicine, it's been a huge push to include, things related to equity and inclusion, diversity. And I know they went through reaccreditation last year, and a large part of the visit had a lot to do with our office, equity and inclusion, which I think is really good. And so Antonio today is going to be talking with us about addressing implicit bias mitigation strategy. So we all have implicit bias, first of all. And so he's going to talk a little bit about that and how do we mitigate. What are some of the strategies here that we can use? So I think this is going to be a pretty good one. As you're aware, it's going to be recorded so that your colleagues in other areas on campus or beyond, if they want access to being able to see this, it can be also available at a later date. So with no other comments, Antonio, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, it's good to see some of the admissions people. And for those of you who don't know me, yeah, you detected immediately an accent. I was born in Argentina, and I've been here for many, many years, more than 20 years, but my accent's still there. So, yeah, so some of you might be aware that Keith already presented a Lunch and Learn on unconscious bias. And so I'm just going to touch a little bit on the definition and how it affects several fields, including medicine. And I'm going to focus especially on ways to mitigate or to reduce your own unconscious bias, so at a personal level, and also some discussion on the unconscious bias training at the institutional level and how to gauge whether it's effective or not, and setting goals, etc. So before we start, some of you might know this already. Well, these are the learning objectives, or hopefully at the end of this seminar, you should be able to do these things. Some of you might have seen this exercise already, but just be patient with me. And you are supposed to think of a number from 1 to 10. You can write it down if you want, or just think about it. Number from 1 to 10, then add 2 to that number. Then double it. Then subtract your original number. Then add 8. Are you lost already? Then subtract the original number. Then divide it by 3. And now find the corresponding letter on of the alphabet that corresponds to that number. So 1 equals A, 2 equals B, etc. So once you have that letter, think of a country, you can write it down if you want, that starts with that letter. Got it? Yes? Now think of an animal that starts with the last letter of that country. You got the animal? All right. And then think of a fruit that starts with the last letter of that animal. All right, so you can put in the chat the chances you think that I will guess all three of them. 0 chance, no chance, absolutely no chance. So I'm gonna make it easy for you. What are the chances that I guessed that was Denmark, kangaroo, and orange? Some of you are laughing, so some of you. So usually I get about 70 to 90% of the people. And so it's great that some of you thought outside the box. And this is a good exercise that shows the unconscious bias called groupthink. And it demonstrates that there are many other countries with a D, many other animals than with a K, etc. And so this works better in larger groups because the purpose is to demonstrate that even in diverse, like this is a diverse group, we still have biases, the group thing, because we're exposed every day. The most common countries will be Denmark, etc. So I also like the way it makes you think how our preconceived notions, like it's much easier to think Denmark than Dominican Republic for most people in the US, except baseball players or baseball fans, or kangaroo than koi or kelpie. Some is knowledge and some is just like, it's not on the tip of your tongue. But you can extrapolate that to many other things, like personal relationships, etc. So I really like that. Any of you can think of a way that I can ask the question that will mitigate the bias? There is a way that I can ask the question that will be less likely to give this homogeneous answer. I could ask you, think of all the animals with that letter, for example, and then pick one. And so that will reduce the outcome of selecting the same, everybody selecting the same. All right. And so there are several, we'll see all the unconscious biases that affect our daily life. But a definition, just going straight to the definition of unconscious bias, is attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions, which we all possess, but we cannot identify by direct introspection. So if I think, okay, what biases do I have? What preferences or dislikes do I have? I have quite a bit. You know, those are explicit biases, things that you can think that you have, and you act on those biases. Whereas the unconscious biases, you are not aware. And so there are, the experts in the matter have come up with instruments that are like surrogates for those biases. And as I said, the biases that operate in our daily life, groupthink is the one we just saw, with our influences. Our actions are influenced by your environment, the people you are with, etc. Confirmation bias, very common nowadays. Facebook, the news, Google, is the tendency to confirm your own beliefs by screening information and accepting only information that fits your beliefs. stereotype threat. That's also very common. So this is a good time to I'm gonna give this to Kim, and so you can have this presentation has notes with details on all these things, so I don't have to go over it right now. But anyway, so how do we measure those unconscious biases? There are several instruments or several measures that scientists in the field of social psychology have designed. The most common ones is the priming instruments to measure the priming effect. Like this is a typical example where you have SOP with one letter there, and you have the context is pushing you to pick soup, or with this context is pushing you to pick soap. And so they have adapted this priming effect to measure biases. This is not a lot in use anymore. The most common one is called the IAT. Any of you have taken the IAT? All right. So this is just a very short video that describes in detail better than I can do it. So let me just play it.
Adding the IAT and indeed all reaction time measures begins with a basic insight. It's always easier for our brains to sort two concepts together if they are closely associated in our minds. For example, if I say the word dog and ask you to complete this word, you'll be quicker to think cat than bat. Or if I say the word doctor, you will be quicker to think nurse than purse. Armed with this insight, scientists created the IAT, which measures how quickly we sort various pictures and words flash on a computer screen together. Our sorting speed reflects how tightly we associate any two concepts. Quicker sorting means stronger association. The black-white race attitude test, for example, compares implicit attitudes toward two racial categories, black folks and white folks. Each racial category is represented by cropped photos of male faces. To begin, you're asked to sort the faces as quickly as possible. If you see a white face, hit a key to your left. If you see a black face, hit a key to your right. Next, you sort words that represent two attitudinal categories, good and bad. When you see a good word such as beauty, hit a key to your left. When you see a bad word such as filth, hit a key to your right. Now the real challenge starts. You're instructed to sort both photos and words, whatever flashes on the screen. For some runs, you are instructed to press the same key for white faces and good words, say on your left, and a different same key for black faces and bad words, say on your right. If you have a more positive association with white folks as compared to black folks, then in this particular arrangement, you will find your groove and fly through the test. Most of us do. But on other runs, which are randomized and counterbalanced, the IAT will give you different directions. Press the same key for white faces and bad words, and another same key for black faces and good words. In these runs, most players can't quite get into a groove, take longer to respond, and make more mistakes by hitting the wrong key. The average time differential between the two arrangements, white plus good as compared to black plus good, is called the IAT effect and reflects the strength of an attitude. On average, we might be a fraction of a second faster pairing white faces with good words than black faces with good words. This means that on average, we have an implicit preference for whites. Over nearly 2 decades, millions of people have taken implicit association tests hosted by Project Implicit. These tests have measured everything from racial attitudes to gender associations to preferences for one political candidate over another. The results are overwhelming. Implicit biases, measured by reaction times, are systematic and pervasive. They are statistically significant, which means they are not due to chance. On average, our implicit attitudes, which, to remind you, are overall valences toward a category, predictably favor certain groups over others. 80% of participants prefer young over old, 69% thin over overweight, 68% white over black, 76% able-bodied over disabled. Our implicit stereotypes, which are specific trait associations, are also predictable. 72% of participants associate blacks with weapons as opposed to harmless objects. 61% associate Asians with the foreign as opposed to American. 72% associate women with humanities as opposed to math. 76% associate women with family as opposed to career. Pervasiveness does not mean that every single person has the exact same amount of bias. There's wide variability across individuals and groups. For instance, most whites have an implicit preference for whites over blacks, but African Americans show no preference on average. But there's a natural bell curve around that zero average, with about a third of African Americans also showing an implicit attitude in favor of whites over blacks. And in the IAT.
All right, so there is a link to the IATs. I highly recommend that you guys take it. There are several versions from gender, skin, weight, age, etc. There are also with actors and actresses. There's lots of them. And as I said, I think right now is the number of people who have taken is more than 50 million. And so scientists in the field have associated IAT results and confirmed as correlation with callback after interviews, evaluating African American at all levels in universities, research, etc. Women, even there are some people that published on a video game where they show higher rate incidence of accidental shooting of black men in a video game. This is crazy. I don't know who did that experiment. And then from there, you can extrapolate this to consequences in healthcare, for example. This has been proven. Fewer prescription for pain medication, fewer bypass surgeries, less likely to receive kidney dialysis for kidney problems, higher incidence of amputations for diabetics. And this is not only for people from black race, but from all the different races and colors. It's a really good study if you want to see it in more detail. In 2009, a group of scientists did a meta study with compiling 120 reports or papers that had 15,000 individuals. And the correlation between implicit bias in actions, like discrimination actions or different treatment, is actually quite weak. Correlation coefficient of 0.23 is quite weak compared to the perfect ideal, which will be 1.0. A few years later, another group, these were scientists that are against the whole construct of implicit biases. They calculated the same coefficient even lower at 0.15%. So immediately, everybody, including me, we're thinking, well, why are we talking about this? And so a good idea is to see how it correlates with other things, given the seriousness of actually having something that can predict or correlate with actions, discrimination actions. So if you compare with smoking and cancer, even though you get 12 times higher incidence of cancer if you are a smoker, the correlation coefficient is very low. It's 0.08 because not many people get cancer, lung cancer. Lead in pain, similar. And so very low coefficient, but I don't see people giving kids to drink in chips, paint chips or things like that. And so the fact that the correlation coefficient is low doesn't mean that we cannot use it. We just have to be aware. And the other thing that the other good correlation or good image that you can have is that one of the creators of the IAT compares the IAT with measuring blood pressure. If you measure your blood pressure, if I measure my blood pressure now, I bet it's high 16s, like that. But it's one time. Whereas if I control my blood pressure every day at the same time of the day, etc., it has a much higher predictive value. And so that's what he's saying, that the method itself is imperfect, but not irrelevant. And so the criticisms that you will see in the literature, and some people, when you're training for this, some people will object to it, is this list. Like they confuse the construct, the existence of unconscious bias versus the measure, how precise or how exact is the IAT. Reliability. You can, just like the blood pressure, one day you might be low, another day might be high. So what matters is the trends and the continuous application. If you take the IAT many times, you get better. I get better at clicking the K and the S. And so I make less mistakes, fewer mistakes. So that people that have a lower cognitive ability have problems. Older people have also problems in reaction, etc. Things that are good thing is that it's really hard to fake. They actually hire people to try to fake a bias, and it's not, they couldn't. And so the main question for me is, what is the utility of having this, of doing this test? And if you think of the outcomes, it's something that once you have done it a few times, you can use it to monitor. For example, how long-lasting are these? Let's say that I have a bias against obese people, and I do the things that I'm just going to say in a second, and then I do it again, and that bias has been reduced. How long-lasting is that? That maybe we can discuss that later. But you can lower these numbers. You can move them up and down. Now, how does that relate to an actual action in an everyday in your work, etc.? And so, what are the countermeasures? Two main types of countermeasures. At a personal level, mindset and debiasing, we'll see all the things that are included into that. And at the institutional level is training, which also there's a lot of pushback on that now. And uncoupling, that is essentially assuming that everybody's going to have unconscious biases. And then you design an infrastructure and a scaffold of countermeasures, and we'll see what those could be. Something more structured, something less flexible, something that where your biases are going to have a hard time pushing to do something. And so mindset, some of these things are very, very intuitive, and I don't have to go over them. But one thing is be humble. As Dr. Johnson said, we all have unconscious biases. And so the people that says, no, I don't see color, all those things, those are most likely the ones that are going to turn out with higher unconscious bias scores. be mindful. Biases surface when we are stressed, when we are pressed by time. In the exercise that we did before, you had the pressure that I was telling you, multiply it at 8. All that is, if I put a time factor in there, more biases are going to show up. And so I have a list of concrete things that you can do, and I'll show you later, but I'm not going to go over it. And then the third is very important. At an institutional level, like a university, you just mention the unconscious bias training that people, or let's say the sexual harassment training that we had to do last year, and people start getting stressed. Like the one we just did, which was 2 hours, or an hour, something like that, and you couldn't go forward and things like that. That creates that mindset. Okay, I have to do unconscious bias training. Dang it. And whereas if you take it as a personal challenge, I'm going to do this because it's going to make me better, etc. It makes a huge difference. So there are things you can do for that. Any questions with respect to this? Okay. Then debiasing. These are pretty simple exercises that you can do to essentially scrub your mind of your biases. The one that people use the most is meaningful exposure to counter stereotypical exemplars. For example, you can have interactions or learn about female scientists, Latino doctors, or Asian novelists. These are counteract the usual stereotype that there are no Latino doctors, etc. And so you can do what is available to you, obviously, but in-person interaction works better. Moving, visiting, essentially change your geography, add new friends, etc. And then what do you have in your environment? What pictures do you have in your office? What's on your screensaver? Some people might hate this Obama photo. You can put something else in there. But every little thing counts. And people have published on this, and just by doing these things, they have reduced the scores. And notice that I said reduce the scores, not necessarily an action at the level of discrimination, etc. And the most important part of this is that this is an ongoing process. And so at all time, you are getting awareness, doing the IATs or any of the other tests, then use a strategy to minimize, and then keep going. And so I can go over this, but I like it that it says implicit. And so this is essentially combining all the things that I said, plus some of the ones that are the training. And so introspection, definitely use the IAT, mindfulness, yoga, meditation, etc. Perspective taking, that's very important for people who do a lot of interviews. When you get the list of interviews that you're going to have, try to be in their shoes and not as a member. Oh, I have to interview a woman, a Latina, and so just try to be in her shoes and take the point of view of the person and compare it to the stereotype. And so that keeps the bias outside. Try to make it as explicit as possible. Slow down. That's very clear that stress and time limits increase the biases. This is similar to perspective taking, but this is evaluating the individual. This is I've seen a lot of papers now when they talk about cultural humility. Instead of saying, I don't see color, just adopt a multicultural approach to everything. And this is very easy for people like me, for example, my wife, that we are continuously comparing ourselves to the rest. And so it's not only the rest in here, but students from other places. And that's something that we do intuitively. Whereas somebody who grew up here and hasn't moved around, it's more difficult. So embrace multiculturalism. And then institutionalized fairness, and we'll talk about this in a second. And then take two. This, you're gonna fail, and you perhaps you'll see that there's no changes for a while, and as I said, is you have to try many times. All right, and so if none of those things help, there is a thing called decoupling, which is you can do this, or it's more common that this happens at an institutional level, where you have if you're going to hire somebody, then you design the job description on tasks and ability, and you give that to the search committee. So you try to reduce the level of, I like this person, I think this person will fit here. Vague comments like those are most likely to have a larger bias component. The same thing with evaluation forms. Those of you who are faculty, you know how the evaluation forms are not very specific or standard. And so it's easier to make comments that could be based on a bias. Structured interviews, and Doug, we talked about this a lot. It's much harder to do, but there are a lot of schools now doing it. At least a portion of the interview could be structured. And then diverse search committees. And that's the most important one. When you have a large and diverse committee, then the individual biases, they're all in the pool. So it's most likely that the committee as a whole is going to be less biased. And so, and training is the last thing. These are just a few articles that I was looking at these online, and you have paper. Does implicit bias training work? And so my question is, if you define it as implicit bias training as the efforts or the activity to educate people about implicit bias in everyday life, then it's the same as asking, does teaching math work? It totally depends how you do it and what's the outcome. Is it the outcome that you're going to learn the basic math and division, etc., or create a mind that is going to be more analytical and more critical thinker, and etc. So you have short-term goals that are easy to measure and to attain, or you have goals that are like big time. What are we teaching? Are we teaching basic math, or we're teaching calculus? Who's learning it? Are these high school students or college students or us, one of us? Who's teaching? You have the expert teacher or math researcher, or you have somebody like me who I haven't taken calculus at all. And how are they teaching it? So how do we apply this to implicit bias? Well, the outcomes, you have to define them really well. Like chastity, if we're thinking of, we're going to make a more diverse institution, that clearly cannot be done by training on implicit bias or little trainings like that. That's much more, depends on many other things. Whereas if you want to, do you know the content? Is everybody on the same page what implicit bias is at these institutions? Then yes, that could be a thing. Content. You can go from what is a bias to strategies to intervene at the personal level or at the institutional level. The audience, as I said, mandated. You have to take to be in the admissions committee, you have to take an implicit bias training versus somebody who's motivated already. Then rank and file. Obviously, we at admissions committee, we have that need. So we will have an interest perhaps higher than people that are in the admissions committee just as members to fill the service, etc. The teachers, expertise. We have at ETSU some social psychologists that there's nobody doing research on this field, but you can have those type of experts, trained facilitators, people who are sent away to be trained on these topics and then come back and train us. And then you have motivated coworkers like me that I just read some papers and I'm telling you these things. Shame on me. And then even the identity. Some people have published that, for example, for some things, it's better that a white faculty presents these topics than either a Black or Latino. And this has been measured in outcomes and things like that. So that will be a teacher identity. Rapport, for example, if we're doing these trainings at a police department, it's better than perhaps a retired captain or somebody like that present these things that somebody like me goes there and does it. And then the teaching practices, passive like this, or active learning when you actually go through exercises into like real world exercises. Length, 1 hour lunch and learn, or less than an hour, versus what Tori, what you are thinking is something much more involved. Huh? Yeah, so that will definitely will be better. So does implicit training works? Well, it depends. But I think the bottom line is that changing the mind is hard. Social change is even harder, but I think it's worth trying. So I think the purpose of perhaps this Lunch and Learn is just instigate more of this. I think that's the last one. So let me share this document. I'll share with you in the chat. That is similar to this slide, but it has also resources with links with resources for introspection you will have a third column that has resources that you can use. Those could be papers, could be websites, etc. Then for those of you who are in medical education, but this could be for actually any sort of education. This is a form that you can use. I can show you. Well, you can open it. It's a form that you can use to keep yourself accountable. And so if you fill this form regularly, you can do that. And then the last thing that I would like to share is a paper. This is just one of the papers. There's a lot of research on this. In this one, they show is an intervention. It's a long-term reduction of implicit bias using some of the techniques that I showed you. This is, I think, is a prejudice habit-breaking intervention. You can see how the techniques they use, and they show that it's possible. The literature is mixed. There is meta studies, for example, where they looked at 17 of these interventions, and the effects are not regular. Some of them big effects, some others no effect. So I think we're still in the early stages. All right, any question or any comments?
Antonio,
Uh-huh.
can we go back and look at that evaluation form that you just put up there a minute ago?
Yeah. There is one for I have one also for family doctors. Let me open it.
Well, I'm not sure it needs to be open here, but I'd like to look at that form more closely.
Oh, okay.
See if I could use it somehow in our business.
Yeah. So were you able to get it from the link? One of those.
I'm able to look at it, but I'm working in a very limited environment.
Oh, yeah. So it's nothing very detailed or anything. It's just a strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's essentially just keeping the things that you're supposed to be doing fresh in your mind. And
well, that seems to be a very important thing is that you do keep these things in your mind and you keep in mind that you are programmed to be implicitly biased. And, it takes that kind of concentration to overcome that type of bias. I think if you have to recognize it and admit it. And that IAT, when I first took my first AIT, it shocked me.
Yeah. Tom, I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Antonio, I first wanted to ask, where are those links that you said you were sending? I didn't get them. I don't know if how you're sending them, where to look.
Oh, sorry. Wait, I've been sending it to somebody. Yeah, I haven't been sending it to everyone. Sorry, wait just a second. I've been sending it to Teresa Cannon. Okay, I'll send it again.
Is it going to be in the chat or? Oh, okay.
There's
just showed up.
Yes, that's one. I'm so sorry.
So while you're sending, I have another question.
Uh-huh.
Are there any studies or information to show either in recognizing implicit bias or in trying to address it, whether the effectiveness of doing it yourself versus doing it in groups. And I know there was a second part to that question, but I've forgotten it right now. But just the comparison of self-evaluation and self-corrective measures versus groups. Oh, I know the other thing I was going to ask is there a better period or time interval by which you should address these things? Or
Yeah.
you might say daily, but what's practical?
Well, once you get into this mindset of, for example, perspective taking and individuation and all those things, once you get used to doing that, like for example, I do that when I'm about to interview somebody. I do that before I start the interview. Even I don't do this every time with the screening because you know how it is. But for example, for evaluation, I also do that. I always try to do it. And with respect to do it on your own or in groups, I did read, I can't remember how many, but I read a review where they talked that it's worth doing some of these exercises in groups. Just because of it, we all have different biases.
Yeah, I would think that's true, especially if the groups are sort of supportive, non-judgmental, sort of safe groups to do that with, where you could feel comfortable and not guarded.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, nice to see everybody. We're going to have an early lunch. You're very welcome, and we'll see each other soon, huh?
Anthony, I want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
It is very eye-opening, you know, when you do these tests. And I think we're in higher education, you know, it encourages me because it's all about growth and expanding my knowledge, and not just about things, but about myself. So I appreciate that. Everyone, there is an evaluation that I did put in the chat box. So if you have a few moments, probably take you 2 or 3 minutes. If you would fill that out, we really appreciate it. As Antonio said, this is being recorded, and probably.
And I will also send the PDF of the presentation so you can put it in the same place.
And I will send that off to everybody that is in attendance today. And the recording, as well as past Lunch and Learns, are on our Equity and Inclusion website. So if you ever want to go back and you can't find that link or whatever, you know, please feel free to stop in our website and check it out.